Len Bias was born ready to be a great basketball player. He was strong, a great leaper, a pure shooter, a relentless competitor, and a tenacious player. But Len was not born ready to control other aspects of his life. Many still think Bias could have been one of the best basketball players of all time. When many think of Len, they also reflect on his death caused by a drug overdose. As a result, Len Bias has a mixed legacy. I'm Dave Ungrady, the author of the book Born Ready, The Mixed Legacy of Len Bias. I'd like to let you know about a documentary based on the book. The documentary will capture Len's complex and mixed legacy and will humanize his story.
Back in the 80s, I would say there were three guys that stood out above the crowd, and that was Michael Jordan, Ralph Sampson, and Len Bias.
Len was going to score, then he was going to block the shot on the other end, then he was going to score again, and then he was going to steal the ball, and he was going to dunk, and then that was going to be the game. They knew he was a superhero the same way that the people that watched thought he was a superhero.
In the 40 years I've had the honor to coach at Duke and in the ACC, the two opponents that I think were the most talented were Michael and Len Bias.
His legacy is one of great expectations never achieved because he made one very poor decision that cost his life.
The Boston Celtics select Len Bias of the University of Maryland.
What are you talking about? I'm talking about someone needs, Len Bias needs help. Well, it doesn't matter what his name is. What's the problem? He's not breathing right. Please come quick.
In 1986, I was counsel to the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary when Len Bias died. I processed the legislation that grew out of his tragic death. The system became much more harsh, sentences became much longer, prison populations expanded, prison conditions became worse and could not be corrected in the courts.
That tragedy is the part of the story that's not told. And there have been a lot of people that have languished in prison for relatively nothing because of Len's death.
Due to choices, I ended up going down a self-destructive path and starting with being in a relationship with a drug dealer.
A drug dealer who was involved in a major crack cocaine ring. She was eventually sentenced to 24 years in prison. Smith-Pradia served 6.5 years of her sentence before being released by President Bill Clinton's order of clemency. During her stay in prison, she gave birth to her son.
It's a story of inspiration and hope because we're living in a society where a lot of our young people, and I would imagine here in Memphis, feel a sense of hopelessness.
I concluded that Len Bias's death was the single most important date in the history of drugs in the United States since the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous in June of 1935.
The NBA even added a dramatic play that referenced Len's death to help teach rookies in its orientation program make better decisions.
At this school in Washington Heights, this troupe of actor-teachers is staging a drama. It's called Home Court. It's a play about an inner-city family that's striving to beat the odds. Joining us now are Linda Zimmerman, Executive Director of the Creative Arts Team, and Eugene Key, one of the actor-teachers from that play you just saw, Home Court, which I should note is based not too loosely on the tragedy of Len Bias. Yeah. How do 12, 13, 14-year-old junior high kids respond to what happens up on a play like Home Court?
They can relate to these characters because they see them all the time. Families from broken homes. They know the responsibility of the character I play, Damien. He goes through drug abuse. They really care for him after a while, to see him die after making it so big.
The University of Maryland Athletic Department struggled for years following Len's death.
Not having a defined direction and all the other distractions, I just felt it was time to move on.
We felt the whole university was looking at us like we had bad kids. Some professors would make sarcastic remarks. Oh, you're an athlete. You'll want special things.
Len Bias, Len's mother, began a crusade to educate youth about self-worth, and it continues today.
When Len died, I prayed to die. I did not want to live. 4 years later, Jay died. I prayed to die again. I didn't think I could make it, and told God how unfair it was for me to have to bear this burden. And we are here today experiencing history with the best coming from the Bias family today here at the University of Maryland as Len Bias' name is inducted in the university.
And there are those who say Len's death saved their lives, that his death convinced them to either stop abusing drugs or never abuse drugs.
I have been everywhere to speak, from the wealthiest, the poorest, and everything in between. And everybody has their stories of how Len's death saved them.
There are others who chose to focus on the way Len played basketball and how it has inspired them to be the best players and people they can be.
The inspiration that Len Bias was to Walt Williams and I, and the fact that that motivated us to not only stay at Maryland at the time when we left, but we also came back and contributed to the program in the rebuilding process that ultimately led to it winning the championship in 2002. So we talk about that journey and the lessons that we learned that actually made us better people, because Len Bias was inspirational.
It's the only jersey I wear, my Len Bias jersey. I love it. So growing up in Maryland, I've just been a long time Len Bias fan, and when he went to the Terps, it was amazing.
The reason I talk about Len Bias is because decision making is one of the most important things you can do as an athlete, as a person, as a leader. The documentary is part of the 34+1 campaign and the Born Ready Project, a continuous effort to promote effective decision making primarily for teenagers and young adults.
Len Bias was born ready to be great as a basketball player. He was not born ready for other things in his life. As an example, how to manage drug use, and that killed him. Your life is shaped by the choices you make. You've got to remember that. His life, his legacy, his death was shaped by a choice he made.